What if the scariest thing about American Psycho is not what Patrick Bateman does in secret, but how little he actually has to hide? He says strange things. People mishear him. Names blur. Faces get mixed up. Everyone keeps talking about reservations, suits, restaurants, business cards, tastes. Money, bodies, and status, like those things, are enough to prove that a person is real. And by the end, even his confession seems to disappear into a room full of people who were never really listening. That is what makes the movie feel so cold. Not only that Bateman is dangerous, but that the world around him is so trapped in performance that danger can almost pass as another kind of surface. He looks right. He dresses right. He works in the right place. He knows the right restaurants. He says the right names, or at least names that are close enough for the people around him to keep pretending the conversation is working. He is not emotionally present, but he is socially readable. And in this world, that seems to be enough. American Psycho is often discussed as a puzzle. Did he really do it? Was it all in his head? Was it covered up? Did the movie show reality, fantasy, or something deliberately unstable between the two? Those questions matter because the film wants us to feel that instability. But if we only chase the answer, we might miss the more disturbing part. The deeper question is not just whether Patrick Bateman is guilty. It is why guilt means so little in the world around him. The movie keeps showing us people who barely see one another. They recognize brands faster than feelings. They notice fonts faster than fear. They remember restaurants better than names. They are surrounded by bodies, but almost no one feels fully present. Everyone is performing a version of success, and because everyone is performing, no one has much attention left for the truth underneath. That is why Bateman's mask works. Not because it is a perfect disguise. It works because everyone else is wearing one too. And that makes the film feel strangely modern. It may be about 1980s Wall Street, but the emotional logic is not trapped there. So much of American life still asks people to build a visible self. A work self, a dating self, an online self, a gym self. A taste profile, a clean routine, a public image that proves you are controlled. Successful, desirable, or hard to replace. The horror of American Psycho is not simply that one man has a hidden life. It is that the visible life around him is already hollow enough to hide him. So this is not really a video about solving Patrick Bateman like a riddle. It is about looking at the world that makes him possible. The business card scene. The morning routine. The restaurants. The music speeches. The meme culture that later turned him into an aesthetic. The confession that means nothing. All of it points toward the same uncomfortable idea. Maybe American Psycho is not asking whether Bateman can be exposed. Maybe it is asking whether anyone around him would know how to listen if he was. That is also why the mistaken identities matter so much. At first, they can feel like a running joke. One banker is confused for another. One name slides into another. Paul Allen does not really see Bateman, and later other people do not really see Paul Allen either. But the joke keeps becoming darker. If everyone is reduced to a type, then no one can be held clearly in view. You can be present in the room and still disappear into the category people have already assigned you. The film's world is not chaotic. That is part of the horror. It is organized, expensive, polished, and full of rules. But those rules do not create moral clarity. They create smoothness. They help conversations continue even when something underneath is broken. They help a person pass as normal as long as the signals line up. So the opening question becomes less about Bateman alone and more about the room around him. What kind of culture teaches people to notice the cardstock, the restaurant name, the suit, the body, the job, but not the person? What kind of world makes confession feel like another failed social interaction? That is where the movie's satire becomes more frightening than the mystery.
Is that a gram? After I remove the ice pack, I use a deep...
The morning routine is one of the most famous parts of American Psycho because it is so clean. It has a rhythm that feels almost calming if you detach it from the rest of the movie. Products. Steps. Skin. Exercise. Reflection. A controlled voice explaining a controlled body inside a controlled apartment. But the scene is not really about self-care. It is about construction. Bateman is not simply taking care of himself. He's building Patrick Bateman, piece by piece, every morning. The face, the body, the skin, the tone, the posture. The apartment, the way he describes himself, all of it feels like someone assembling a human costume before going out into a world that rewards the costume. That is why the routine becomes unsettling. It does not reveal a stable person. It reveals the effort required to create the appearance of one. Bateman can describe the surface of himself with total confidence. He can list the products. He can explain the maintenance. He can present the body as evidence. But when the narration gets closer to the self underneath, there is almost nothing there. A blankness. A performance without a center. That is part of why this scene keeps circulating online. It is visually strong, easy to quote, easy to remix, and easy to mistake for a discipline montage if you remove the horror around it. But inside the movie, the routine is not aspirational. It is tragic in a cold way. It shows a man who has mastered presentation and lost contact with personhood. There is something very recognizable in that, especially now. Modern self-optimization culture often uses the language of control. Morning routines, skincare, gym discipline, productivity systems, diet, outfits, work identity, confidence, social presence. None of those things are automatically empty. A routine can be healthy. Discipline can be useful. Style can be meaningful. The movie's point is sharper than simply saying, surface is bad. The problem is what happens when the surface becomes the only self that counts. Bateman's body is not just a body. It is a status object. His apartment is not just a home. It is a showroom. His taste is not just taste. It is another way to prove he belongs to a certain class of men. He is constantly looking at himself, but that looking does not become self-knowledge. It becomes inspection. The mirror matters for that reason. He sees an image, not a person. He studies the body the way someone might study a brand asset. Is it polished enough? Is it desirable enough? Does it communicate power? Does it hide weakness? The tragedy is that the image can answer those questions while avoiding the only one that matters. Who is actually there? That is why the routine is such a strong doorway into the film. It shows that Bateman does not begin the day by becoming honest. He begins by becoming legible. And in a world where legibility matters more than truth, that is enough to let him move through every room as if the mask is the man. The apartment works the same way. It is clean, white, expensive, and strangely empty. It looks like a place designed to communicate taste before it communicates comfort. There is almost no warmth in it. It is not a home so much as a controlled environment, another part of the Patrick Bateman presentation. That distinction matters because the movie keeps showing spaces that look successful but feel emotionally vacant. Bateman's routine does not lead him into a richer inner life. It prepares him to re-enter a social system that only knows how to read surfaces. The body is maintained. The face is prepared. The apartment is arranged. But none of these things answer the central absence. This is why the scene can be misread when it is clipped by itself. In isolation, it can look like discipline. In context, it looks like fear. The fear that if the surface is not perfect, there may be nothing else to hold the self together.
After I remove the ice pack, I use a deep...
Is that a gram?
The business card scene is funny because, on the surface, almost nothing is happening. A few men sit in an office and compare cards. Paper. Dough. Typeface. Color. Dot. Texture. The differences are tiny. To anyone outside that room, the whole thing should barely matter. And that is exactly why it matters so much. These men are not reacting to business cards. They are reacting to identity panic. Bateman does not see Paul Allen's card as paper. He sees it as proof that another man has outperformed him inside the same empty code. The card suggests better taste, better access, better judgment, better status. It says in a language only that room fully understands that someone else is being read as more refined. And for Bateman, that is not a small thing. It is humiliation. The scene works because everyone in it is almost interchangeable. Similar suits. Similar jobs. Similar voices. Similar restaurants. Similar apartments. Similar names that other people keep confusing. When people are that flattened by the same status system, tiny differences have to carry enormous emotional weight. If the men themselves barely feel distinct, then the card becomes a battlefield where distinction has to be invented. That is what makes the scene a miniature version of the whole film. American Psycho is not just laughing at rich men caring too much about design. It is showing a world where personality has been replaced by branding. Your card, your suit, your reservation, your apartment, your body, your cultural references, these are not accessories. They are the language of selfhood that feels especially close to modern American professional culture. The business card may not hold the same power it once did, but the logic did not disappear. It moved into profiles, titles, networks, metrics, curated bios, job announcements, lifestyle signals, taste displays, and the little forms of proof that tell others how to rank us. A font becomes a LinkedIn headline. A card becomes a personal brand. The anxiety is still there. Am I visible enough? Am I impressive enough? Am I replaceable? Bateman's reaction is so extreme because his self is so fragile. If he had a deeper sense of who he was, a better card would be annoying, maybe embarrassing, but not existential. Instead, the card cracks him open. For a moment, he looks like a man whose entire identity can be threatened by paper. Dorsia works in the same way. It is not really about food. It is about access. Being able to get into the right place is more important than enjoying the meal. The restaurant becomes a social password. It proves that other people are supposed to see you as someone who belongs. That is why the film's satire is so sharp. It does not need to give a speech about emptiness. It just shows people treating small status signals like life or death evidence. And because the scene is funny, it becomes even more uncomfortable. We laugh at the absurdity, then realize the absurdity is not as far from real life as we might want. The card is not the problem. The problem is that in this world, there may be nothing more solid underneath it. The scene also reveals something about envy. Bateman does not simply want a good card. He wants the card to settle a deeper question. Who is winning? The tragedy and the comedy is that the answer changes based on almost nothing. A shade of white, a line of type, a tasteful thickness, a watermark. The smaller the difference, the more ridiculous the panic becomes. But that is exactly how status anxiety often works. It feeds on tiny comparisons because tiny comparisons are never finished. There is always someone with a slightly better signal, a slightly better room, a slightly better name, a slightly better invitation. The more a person builds identity out of ranking, the more fragile that identity becomes. Bateman's face in that scene tells us what the dialogue almost does not need to say. He is not looking at a card. He is looking at proof that his carefully maintained image can still lose.
I live in the American Gardens building on West 81st. I live in the American Gardens building on West 81st.
One of the strangest things about American Psycho is what happened to Patrick Bateman after the movie. He became a meme, a reaction image, a gym edit, a Sigma edit, a symbol used for discipline, cold focus, confidence, skincare, suits, success, and emotional detachment. Sometimes it is clearly ironic. Sometimes it is hard to tell. And sometimes it feels like the internet took a character designed to expose emptiness and turned him into an image of ambition. That is not just a funny accident. It is almost too perfect. Because the whole movie is about mistaking surface for substance. Batman looks controlled, but he is not whole. He looks disciplined, but the discipline is attached to a void. He looks successful, but success in his world is mostly the ability to be recognized by the right status signals. The film makes him visually compelling so we can feel the danger of being compelled by the wrong thing. If you isolate the images, Bateman is easy to aestheticize. The suit, the routine, the apartment, the music, the stare, the clean body, the cold delivery. Short-form content can pull those pieces out of context and make them look like power. But inside the movie, those same pieces are evidence of a person who has almost no inner life left. That is why the meme misread matters. It is not about scolding every joke or overreacting to every edit. A lot of people know the satire and play with it knowingly. But the fact that Bateman can be so easily turned into an aspirational image proves how seductive the surface is. This connects directly to American performance culture. The pressure is not only to succeed, but to look like a person who has mastered the appearance of success. Be fit. Be calm. Be unbothered. Be stylish. Be productive. Be desirable. Be impossible to embarrass. Do not look weak. Do not look ordinary. Do not look replaceable. Bateman is a grotesque exaggeration of that demand, but the demand itself is familiar. That is why the film still feels current. It understood that identity could become a package before social media made that package easier to distribute. Bateman does not need a phone camera to think like a brand. He already treats himself like one. The danger of the Bateman aesthetic is that it keeps the packaging and removes the emptiness the film was warning us about. It turns the mask into the message. It says, look at the control, look at the polish, look at the discipline, while forgetting that the movie is asking what happens when a human being becomes nothing but those signals. There is also a reason this misread often connects with masculinity. Bateman performs a version of manhood that is hard, rich, controlled, sexually competitive, physically maintained, emotionally unreachable, and obsessed with ranking. The movie does not present that as freedom. It presents it as a prison with good lighting. So, the question is not just why people meme Bateman. The deeper question is why the empty shell still looks attractive when it is cut into the right shape. Maybe the film remains uncomfortable because it does not only mock Patrick Bateman, it also shows how easy it is for a culture to admire the exact surface that makes him horrifying. The most uncomfortable part is that the misread is not completely irrational. The surface really is designed to be attractive. The suits are sharp. The apartment is clean. The routine is precise. The confidence seems total. The film understands the appeal of that image before it destroys it. That is why the satire has teeth. If Bateman looked obviously pathetic from the first second, the critique would be easier. Instead, the movie lets the surface function. It lets us see why people in his world keep accepting him. Why modern clips can isolate him. Why the aesthetic can travel without the warning attached. The form is powerful enough to detach from the meaning. And that is exactly the danger the film is describing. A culture built around presentation will always risk mistaking presentation for truth. The meme misread is not outside the movie's argument. It is a continuation of it.
There is an idea of a Patrick Bateman. I live in the American Gardens building on West 81st.
American Psycho is disturbing because the nightmare keeps speaking in the language of normal life. It wears a suit. It talks about reservations. It has opinions about music. It understands social cues just well enough to pass through them. It moves through dinners, offices, apartments, dates, clubs, and polite conversations with a strange kind of fluency. The horror does not arrive from outside the system. It is dressed by the system. That is why the movie's comedy is so important. American Psycho is not frightening only because of what Bateman may do. It is frightening because those moments keep colliding with etiquette. The film lets an ordinary social surface continue, while something underneath is completely wrong. It creates a gap between what is being said and what is actually happening. Bateman's music monologues are a perfect example. He can talk about songs, albums, artistic development, and cultural value in a voice that sounds prepared and confident. But the performance of taste feels disconnected from actual feeling. He can describe music without seeming moved by it. He can use culture as another polished object, another way to fill a room with language while avoiding connection. That is one of the film's sharpest observations. Taste can become a social costume too. Knowing the right references does not automatically mean someone has emotional depth. Being able to talk fluently about art does not mean the art has reached them. Bateman's opinions often sound less like feeling and more like presentation. The people around him also keep performing. They flirt, compete, gossip, compare, misunderstand, and drift past one another. Nobody seems fully present. Even when something disturbing appears near the surface, it gets absorbed into the rhythm of social life. A strange comment becomes a joke. A wrong name becomes a normal mistake. A warning sign becomes part of the noise. Jean matters because she offers a brief possibility of a different kind of attention. Around her, Bateman's mask feels less invincible. Not because she fully understands him, but because her presence is quieter, more sincere, less trapped in the same status game. That makes him feel more exposed. The film lets us sense that if someone truly saw him, the whole performance might become harder to maintain. Detective Kimball brings another possibility: consequence. His scenes created tension that Bateman might finally be observed by someone whose job is to notice details. But even that possibility remains slippery. The film does not turn into a clean investigation. The truth stays unstable, as if the world itself resists becoming clear. That is what makes the horror polite. The social order does not collapse around Bateman. It keeps functioning. People keep going to dinner. They keep caring about access. They keep using the correct tones. They keep confusing names. They keep rewarding appearances. This is why the movie should not be reduced to shock value. Its violence is part of the horror, but the sharper discomfort is how easily that horror is surrounded by normality. The film asks whether a polished society can hide cruelty not because everyone is secretly monstrous, but because everyone is too invested in keeping the performance smooth. The nightmare is not that Bateman is outside civilization. The nightmare is that he fits inside it too well. That is also why the movie's politeness feels so suffocating. People keep following social scripts even when the scripts are useless. The right words are said. The right tones are used. The right places are visited. But none of that produces real intimacy or real accountability. It produces motion. In that sense, the horror is not only that cruelty can hide behind good manners. It is that manners can become a substitute for moral attention. A person can keep the conversation smooth while failing to notice the obvious wrongness in front of them. A room can remain elegant while no one inside it is truly safe. American Psycho turns social polish into something eerie. It asks whether a world that values appearances too highly can still recognize when appearance is covering a wound.
Oh wait, and I need reservations for 2. I mean, no one's dealing with a homicide squad yet or anything, right?
The ending of American Psycho is famous because it refuses to settle down. Did Bateman actually kill people? Did he imagine it? Was something covered up? Did the apartment get cleaned? Was Paul Allen alive, or was someone else mistaken for him? Is the lawyer confused, or is Bateman trapped in a world where identity is so unstable that even evidence cannot hold? The film keeps those questions alive. But the most disturbing part of the ending may not be the ambiguity itself. It may be the fact that Bateman's confession changes almost nothing. A confession is supposed to break the mask. It is supposed to force reality into the room. It should be the point where the performance can no longer continue. But Bateman confesses, and the world does not know what to do with it. His words have no stable place to land. They are misheard, dismissed, absorbed, contradicted, or simply made irrelevant by the same social fog that has been there the entire movie. That is why the final line about the confession meaning nothing feels so bleak. It is not just personal despair. It is the movie's whole social argument compressed into one thought. Truth without attention becomes weightless. Guilt without recognition becomes another private performance. Even confession can become empty if no one is capable of receiving it. This is where the film's ending connects to American fears about status and power. Not in a simple one-to-one way, and not as a realistic legal drama. It works more like a nightmare about reputation. If someone has the right name, the right job, the right circle, the right surface, can the truth slide off them? Can the system keep mistaking, protecting, redirecting, or smoothing over what should be impossible to ignore? The movie never gives a clean institutional answer, but emotionally it feels like yes. Bateman belongs to a class of people who are constantly confused with one another, yet also protected by that confusion. The same interchangeability that makes him feel empty also makes accountability slippery. If no one sees the individual clearly, how can anyone clearly attach guilt? The apartment scene deepens that feeling. A place that should contain evidence becomes strange, altered, unavailable, or reabsorbed into real estate logic. The space itself stops feeling like a witness. The world can repaint, resell, rename, and move on. Even physical reality starts to feel like another surface. That is why forcing one answer can make the ending smaller. If we say everything was imagined, we risk ignoring the social world that makes his fantasies meaningful. If we say everything was literal, we still have to explain why the world barely reacts. Either way, the film points back to the same emptiness. Bateman is in a society where identity is unstable, listening is rare, and truth is weaker than image. The ending is not terrifying because it hides one final clue. It is terrifying because every interpretation leads back to a world with no moral traction. The confession does not free Bateman. It does not expose him. It does not cleanse him. It does not even give him the satisfaction of being fully known. He speaks, and the surface remains. And maybe that is the most frightening version of the story. Not a man who cannot confess, but a world where confession is no longer enough to make anyone hear. This is why confession does not feel like relief. In another story, the confession would be the moment the hidden self becomes undeniable. Here, it becomes another failure of communication. Bateman may want to be punished, known, feared, or simply confirmed as real. But the world gives him none of those things. It gives him confusion. That confusion is worse than a clean denial. A clean denial would still mean his words mattered enough to reject. Instead, they are misfiled. They are treated as impossible because they do not fit the version of reality that the room has already accepted. Reputation becomes stronger than testimony. Social assumption becomes stronger than confession. And that makes the ending feel less like a twist and more like a diagnosis. The truth cannot land because the social system has no place prepared for it.
Hello. Pat Bateman. Hello. Pat Bateman.
The final phrase, "This is not an exit," does not feel like a normal ending. It feels like the movie quietly closing a door that was never really open. Bateman does not escape. But he is not exposed either. He is not freed by confession. He is not transformed by guilt. The world does not stop, turn toward him, and finally recognize what has been happening. It keeps going. The same conversations. The same status games. The same surfaces. The same inability to listen. That is why American Psycho lingers. It is not only a movie about whether one man did or did not do terrible things. It is about a world where the difference between person and performance has become dangerously thin. Bateman wants to be exceptional, but everyone around him is built from the same signals. He wants to be seen, but the people around him can barely see themselves. He wants his truth to break through. But truth cannot break through a room that has no attention left for anything but appearances. And that is where the film still feels modern. The objects have changed. The business card has become the profile. The restaurant reservation has become the access signal. The polished routine has become content. The suit has become an aesthetic. The status game has become easier to broadcast. But the deeper anxiety remains. What happens when the version of yourself that gets rewarded becomes more important than the person underneath? The Bateman meme makes that question even sharper. When people turn him into a symbol of discipline or confidence, they are not necessarily endorsing the whole character. Often they are playing with an image. But the fact that the image works so well is part of the discomfort. The movie warned us about a hollow surface, and decades later, that surface can still be clipped, polished, and reused as aspiration. That does not mean an American Psycho has one simple moral. It is funnier, colder, and more slippery than that. It does not ask us to stop caring about style, discipline, success, or presentation. It asks what happens when those things become substitutes for self. It asks what happens when people know how to perform taste, confidence, and control, but no longer know how to be present with one another. Maybe that is why the ending feels less like a twist and more like a trap. The exit was never just a door out of Bateman's mind. It would have to be a way out of the world that made his mask useful. A way out of the ranking, comparing, performing, mishearing, and polishing. A way back to something human enough to notice truth when it speaks. But the film does not give us that way out. It leaves us with the surface intact, the confession unresolved. And the strange feeling that the most frightening thing was not that Patrick Bateman was hidden. It was that, in the world around him, being hidden did not take much effort at all. That final thought is what keeps the film from becoming only a period satire. The specific world is Old Wall Street, but the emotional machinery keeps updating itself. People still build selves out of status signals. They still compare tiny differences. They still mistake polish for depth. They still reward people who look controlled, even when control is just another form of hiding. American Psycho leaves us inside that machinery. No escape route, no final explanation that makes the discomfort neat. No clean moral distance from the world on screen. The film ends with Bateman still surrounded by the same language, the same performances, and the same failure to listen. And maybe that is the most unsettling part of all. The monster is not simply hidden behind the mask. The mask is part of a world that keeps asking everyone to wear one.
After I remove the ice pack, I use a deep